Good morning, everybody, and happy Thursday. All right, today I'm going to read to you part of our book, Frindle. We have 3 chapters to go, and I thought we could either try and finish this or at least make a pretty good chunk or make some progress in this so that we can be done with this book and move on to a new book. So you do not have a reading assignment today. Your reading assignment today is to listen to me, and then you can always go on to Raz Kids and choose your own books to read, or you could open up your textbook and read any of the stories that we have read so far, because we are now done with that book. We have read all the stories in that book, and then we will start a new book when we get back. Okay, so anyway, Frindle by Andrew Clements. Okay, we were kind of in the middle of one of the chapters, so I'm going to start off where we left off. When Bud Lawrence saw the article about the new word, he had his lawyer file a preliminary trademark claim on the word Frindle. Within 4 days he had set up a small company that was selling cheap plastic ballpoint pens, specially imprinted with the word Frindle. He sold 3,000 Frindles the first week, and they sold so fast that stores all over Westfield couldn't keep them in stock. Then just as quickly, kids stopped asking for Frindles. The sales slowed down and Bud Lawrence started thinking about other projects. A week later, it was Halloween. The leaves started falling and it seemed like the town was going to quiet down. And it would have if it hadn't been for Alice Lunderson. Alice lived in Betherly, a town 7 miles away from Westfield, and she worked part-time for the local CBS TV station in Carrington, a town of about 75,500 people. When there was important area news, disasters like floods or tornadoes, or sometimes if she came across little stories that seemed cute or original, Alice would call the station news manager in Carrington. If it was a good story, or if it was a day when not much else was happening in the world, then the TV station would send out a van with a camera crew to shoot some videotape. Alice subscribed to all the small town newspapers in the area to keep up the local events. Most of them were published on Thursday, and they arrived at her house by Monday or Tuesday. Then it took her a day or so to look through them all. On Wednesday morning, she finally saw the article in the Westfield Gazette about the word war. She read it through twice and looked carefully at the class photograph. She was sure that this story was a winner. The TV station manager in Carrington agreed with her. He called the CBS station in Boston, because sometimes Boston picked up stories from the Carrington newsroom. The woman in Boston thought the story had some real zip to it, so she called the network news editor in New York. When the facts of the Westfield Gazette article got to New York, the staff there loved it. They looked over the schedule sheet for the week and decided it would be the perfect closing story for the CBS Evening News for the next day, Thursday. Orders flew back through the telephone link from New York to Boston to Carrington to Betherly. By Wednesday at noon, Alice had a go order to take the story all the way. It was her first piece to get onto the national news, and 20 million viewers would see it. Alice Lunderson and her camera crew stood on Mrs. Granger's front porch Wednesday after school. Mrs. Granger was not impressed at all by the lights and the microphones. She looked right into the camera and said, "I have always said that the dictionary is the finest tool ever made for educating young minds. And I still say that. Children need to understand that there are rules about words and language, and that those rules have a history that makes sense. And to pretend that a perfectly good English word can be replaced by a silly made-up word just for the fun of it, well, it's not something I was ready to stand by and watch without a fight." "And have you lost that fight, Mrs. Granger?" asked the reporter. Mrs. Granger turned her eyes up to nearly full power as she looked into the camera, and with a pale smile, she said, "It's not over yet." When Alice and the crew showed up at Nick's house, the Allen family was ready for them. Mom and Dad sat on the couch and Nick between them. Nick squinted into the lights. His mom had worked out with Nick what he would say and what he couldn't say. "You remember, young man," she had told him as she combed his hair, "these reporters are just looking for a quick story that will make some excitement. But you have to stay here and live in this town, so mind your P's and Q's." As they sat there on the couch, Mrs. Allen had her foot on the top of Nick's under the coffee table, and she pushed down. It meant that the reporter had just asked a question that she was going to answer for him. Mrs. Allen did not trust reporters. "So tell me, Nick, why did you make up this new word frindle?" asked Alice Lunderson. Nick gulped and said, "Well, my teacher, Mrs. Granger, said that all the words in the dictionary were made up by people, and that they mean what they mean because we say they do. So I thought it would be fun just to make up a new word and see if that was true." "And were you surprised when Mrs. Granger got mad about that?" asked Alice with a smile. There was a push on Nick's foot, and his mother said, "We never felt that Mrs. Granger got angry. When everyone started using the word frindle, it just got to be a disruption, that's all. She's really a very fine teacher." "Yes," said Nick. "I mean, I learned a lot about words, and without her, I wouldn't have. So what's next up for you in the new word?" Alice was wrapping it up. She could see that Nick and his parents were not going to be pushed into saying anything controversial, so she just kept it light and happy. "Well," said Nick, "the funny thing is, even though I invented it, it's not my word anymore. Frindle belongs to everyone now, and I guess everyone will figure out what happens together." Alice also had a short chat with a worried-looking Mrs. Chatham and a smiling Bud Lawrence, maker of the official frindle. When she shot her opening bit and her closing bit, and the camera crew drove back to Carrington to edit all the pieces and put them together into a 2-minute news story. The next night, when all the serious news about wars and oil prices and world food supplies had been talked about on the CBS evening news, the anchorman looked into the camera and smiled. He said, "It is believed by many that the word quiz was made up in 1791 by a Dublin theatre manager named Daly. He had bet someone that he could invent a brand new word in the English language, and he chalked up the letters Q-U-I-Z onto every wall and building in town. The next morning, there it was, and within a week people all over Ireland were wondering what it could mean, and a new word had been created. Quiz is the only word in English that was invented by one person for no particular reason. That is until now. And there's a new word, frindle, and here's Alice Lunderson in Westfield, New Hampshire, with the story." Alice came on the screen, and with a short introduction, then, right then and there on TV, Mrs. Granger and Nick and Bud Lawrence and Nick's mom were talking to 20 million people about frindles. One of those 20 million people was a producer for The Late Show with David Letterman. And another one of those 20 million people was a staff writer for People magazine, and another one was a writer for 321 Contact magazine for kids. Dozens of other writers and producers and marketing people saw that story on the news, and all of them smelled a great story. During the next 3 weeks, every man, woman, and child in America heard about this funny new word, and kids were using instead of the word pen. And kids in Ohio and Iowa and New York and Texas and California started using it too. Bud Lawrence was suddenly flooded with orders for anything with the word frindle on it, and he quickly got interested again. But there were complications. Bud's lawyer said, "You see that stack of orders there? Trouble, that's what it is. We got a trademark filed, but it's only like an application. The whole country knows that this little kid made up a word, and unless you make a deal with your dad, you're going to end up with nothing, maybe even a big fat lawsuit. That kid owns that word." Okay, so here is the David Letterman show. America heard about this funny new word. So there he is being interviewed. You guys may not know who David Letterman is, but your mom and dad certainly do. He was quite popular when he was on television in the evenings. When Mr. Allen came at lunchtime, his wife told him that he had to call Bud Lawrence. "It's something about the new word. This is not good news to Tom Allen. He was sick and tired of all the fuss, and being away from the hardware store so much while all this nonsense was happening had put him weeks behind on his paperwork. He'd be lucky now to get his Christmas order in time." Even though he didn't really want anything to do with it, Bud was an old friend, so on the way back to the store, Nick's dad went to Bud Lawrence's office. "Tom, good to see you," said Bud. He stood up and walked around his desk to shake hands. "Have a seat." Tom sat down uneasily, and Bud pulled another chair over. "Ever seen Westville get so stirred up about anything in your life? You and Ginny must be pretty proud of that boy of yours." Bud couldn't remember Nick's name. Tom shifted in his chair and nodded. "Yes, he's quite something, and for sure. But I tell you, Bud, I'm ready for all this to just die down and blow away. Too much fuss." Instantly, Bud saw how to get what he wanted. "Well, Tom, I'm afraid it's not really going to go away. Looks like something started up, and people are real interested. Probably saw those bright red ballpoints around town with the word Frindle on them. That was my doing. Just testing the waters, but your boy, he owns that word. I got my lawyer to apply for a trademark a few weeks back because that's just the way I am. New things come along. I like to be right there in the middle of it. He grinned at Tom Allen, and Tom smiled back weakly. Right now I got a shirt printer in Massachusetts and another one in Chicago and another one in Los Angeles making t-shirts with the word Frindle above a picture of a pen. I mean a Frindle. Each supplier has ordered so far or each supplier has orders so far for over 20,000 shirts. Profit on every one of those is going to be $2, maybe $3, and I'm talking some big pen and pencil companies in Hong Kong and Japan about a deal that could be worth some really big money. They've seen this Frindle thing in the media and they want to buy the rights to the trademark and make a new line of Frindles for kids. I'm not kidding. This is hot, a hot idea. Bud guessed right, but the thought of all this made Tom shrink back uncomfortably in his chair. It was way too much fuss. Tom, let me be direct with you. As the boy's guardian, you need to do the right thing about all this. I'd like to see where all this is going to go. I'm going to take some risks, spend some money, see what happens. But I need your permission, and I need your signature on these trademark papers, and I need to strike a deal with you about permission to use that trademark. I know it seems like a big ruckus about a word, but we just can't tell what's to come of it unless we take some steps. Bud pointed at the papers on his desk. That's a contract, and it's fair and honest. It gives your boy 30% of whatever profit I might make. That's a fair royalty, generous for this kind of deal. So far, what do you say? Makes sense? Let me take care of all the fuss, and I'll see if some good doesn't maybe come of it all. The papers and the pen were on the desk next to Tom. He looked at Bud, then reached over, picked up the pen, signed both copies of the trademark papers and 3 copies of the contract. I've got no reason to doubt you one bit, Bud, and I sure don't want to mess with any of this myself. Is that it? He asked, standing up. Not quite, Tom. Here. Then Bud Lawrence handed Nick's dad a check for $2,250. What's this for? That's what I owe Nick for the sales of Frindles from the first 3 weeks, explained Bud with a smile. Tom looked at the check and said, This is terrific, Bud, and I'm really glad about it because it'll sure help with Nick's college. But I wish you'd just keep this between us. If Nick knew, he'd probably stop mowing lawns, and I'd never get him to save another penny. So just between us, okay? Bud said, Sure, Tom, I understand. Just between us. And they shook hands. Mr. Allen left Bud's office and walked across the street to the savings bank. He set up a trust account for Nick, and the bank manager said he could make arrangements with Mr. Lawrence, so any other money could be deposited automatically. That sounded good to Tom Allen. If he never heard another word about it, that would be fine. As Nick's dad walked slowly back to the hardware store, he wondered if things were ever going to be the same again in this quiet little town. Okay, I think that's a good stopping point. So we will read some more tomorrow. All right, friends, we'll see you later.